In August 1971, 24 of the most psychologically healthy men America walked into a basement. 6 days later, the experiment had to be shut down in an emergency. No one was prepared for what those normal men had become. And the most disturbing part, the scientists concluded that if you had been placed in that same basement, under those same conditions, given that same uniform or that same number, you would have done the exact same thing they did. Not because you are evil, not because you have darkness hiding inside you, but because of something far more terrifying. The situation itself would have changed you. This is the story of the Stanford prison experiment. And this is not a story about criminals, or psychopaths, or violent men who were broken before they ever walked through that door. This is a story about completely normal men. Healthy men. Educated men. Men who had never hurt anyone in their entire lives. And what happened to them inside that basement did not just shock the world of psychology. It shattered everything we thought we knew about human nature, because the experiment did not reveal something about those 24 men specifically. It revealed something about all of us, about the hidden layer inside every human being. The layer that stays buried, stays quiet, stays invisible until the right conditions bring it to the surface. And most people never even know that layer exists inside them. It began with a simple newspaper advertisement in the summer of 1971. Philip, a professor of psychology at Stanford University, placed a small ad in a local newspaper. It said, "Male college students needed for a psychological study of prison life. $15 per day for 1 to 2 weeks. 75 men responded. Zimbardo was not looking for just anyone. He personally interviewed every applicant, ran deep psychological tests, screened for any history of mental illness, emotional instability, violence, or drug abuse, because he needed to be absolutely certain that whatever happened inside that experiment, it could not be explained away by saying these men were already troubled. After all the screening, 24 men made the final cut. These were ordinary American college students, the kind of young men you would see laughing with friends, studying in a library, or calling their mothers on a Sunday afternoon. Clean records, combined normal lives. Zimbardo divided them into 2 groups, not based on personality, not based on strength or history, but based on nothing more than a coin flip. 12 men would become prisoners. 12 men would become gods. And that single coin flip would produce results so disturbing that they would change the field of psychology forever. Now here's the first detail that almost nobody talks about. The men assigned as prisoners did not simply show up to Stanford and walk into their cells. Zimbardo wanted this to feel real, completely, overwhelmingly, psychologically real. So, on the morning of August 14th, 1971, Rio Palo Alto police officers showed up at the homes of the student prisoners without any warning whatsoever. They knocked on doors. They put students in handcuffs, in front of their neighbors, in front of their families, in front of anyone watching from the street. They were charged with armed robbery and burglary. Their Miranda rights were read aloud, and they were placed in the back of real police cars. One student later said he genuinely believed there had been a mistake, that the police had the wrong person. He was not performing terror for the sake of the experiment. He was actually terrified. His hands were shaking, his voice was breaking, because nothing in his mind told him this was still just a study. That terror was completely intentional. Zimbardo needed the prisoners to feel like real prisoners from the very first second, not volunteers, not college students playing a role for $15 a day. He needed them to feel in their bones that they had completely lost their freedom when they arrived at Stanford County Jail. In reality, the basement of the psychology building. The process of destroying their identity began immediately. They were stripped of their clothes, searched, sprayed with a delousing chemical. Dressed in ill-fitting smocks with no underwear underneath. A heavy chain was locked around one ankle, a nylon stocking cap pulled over their heads to simulate the feeling of having their hair shaved, exactly the way real prisoners were treated. And then came the final step. They were given a number, not a name, a number. From that moment forward, guards were instructed to never use a prisoner's name, only their number. Because Zimbardo understood something very deep about human psychology. When you strip away a person's name, you begin to strip away their identity. And when identity disappears, something else always takes its place. The guards received a completely different experience. Crisp khaki uniforms, wooden batons, and mirrored silver sunglasses, chosen with one very specific psychological purpose. Mirrored sunglasses. Eliminate eye contact. Completely. The prisoners could never see the guards' eyes, could never read their emotions, could never connect with them as full human beings. The guards became faceless, unreadable, untouchable, but the guards could see everything. That single detail created an immediate and powerful psychological imbalance, one that would spiral into something that no one in that building was truly prepared to witness. By day 3, something had gone deeply wrong. Not dramatically wrong. Not in a way that anyone inside that basement could clearly point to and say, "This is the moment everything changed." It happened the way the most dangerous things happen. Quietly. Gradually. One small step at a time. The guards had stopped feeling like college students doing a psychology experiment, and the prisoners had stopped feeling like volunteers who could simply stand up and walk out the door. Both groups had fallen completely into their roles. Not because anyone forced them, not because anyone threatened them, but because the human mind is far more fragile, far more vulnerable to its environment than any of us want to believe. The guards began waking prisoners up in the middle of the night for random 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning. Bright lights switched on without warning. Prisoners dragged out of sleep, forced to stand against the wall, recite their numbers. Not because it was necessary, not because Zimbardo had instructed it, not because there was any logical reason for it whatsoever. Because they could. They forced prisoners to do push-ups on the cold concrete floor, made them clean toilets with their bare hands, removed bathroom privileges entirely, replacing them with metal buckets inside the cells that prisoners were forced to use, and then live beside for hours before anyone came to empty them. The smell alone was designed to break something inside a person. None of this was in the original plan. Zimbardo had not instructed any of it. No manual described it. No supervisor approved it. The guards had invented these humiliations entirely on their own. And that is the detail that should stop you cold. These were not sadistic men who had been waiting their whole lives for an opportunity like this. These were ordinary college students who had passed every psychological screening just days earlier. Men who had never shown any history of cruelty, violence, or abuse. But give a normal person a uniform, a wooden baton, mirrored sunglasses, and absolute authority over another human being, and something begins to shift inside them. Something quiet. Something they themselves don't even notice happening until it's already too late. One guard became something different from the rest. The prisoners gave him a nickname, John Wayne, because of the way he moved. Slow, deliberate, completely certain of his own power. Every night, John Wayne would walk the corridor alone after the other guards had settled. His boots were quiet on the floor. His baton tapped softly against the cell doors. Not hard enough to make real noise, just hard enough to remind every prisoner behind every door that he was there, that he was watching, that they were not safe. Even in the dark, he never shouted. He never lost his temper. He didn't need to. He would stop outside A cell. Stand perfectly still and say nothing. Just let the silence do the work. Let the prisoner on the other side of that door lie in the dark and wonder, is he still there? Is he going to open the door? What is he going to make me do? One prisoner later described those nights as the worst part of the entire experiment. Not the push-ups, not the buckets, not even the sleepless nights. The sound of those footsteps, and then the silence. Before the experiment, John Wayne had been a completely normal young man. Calm, unremarkable. The kind of person you would never look twice at. Walking down a street, the uniform had done something to him that he had not chosen and did not fully understand. And he was not the only one. By day 4, the prisoners were no longer the same people who had walked into that basement 72 hours earlier. The rebellion of day 2. The barricaded doors, the torn-off numbers, the shouted defiance felt like something that had happened in another lifetime. The spirit that had driven it had been methodically, deliberately, completely crushed. And then prisoner 8612. It did not happen dramatically. It did not happen all at once. It started with small things. He stopped eating, stopped responding when guards called his number, started sitting in the corner of his cell with his back against the wall, knees pulled up to his chest, staring at nothing. Then one evening, something snapped. He began rocking back and forth, slowly at first, then faster, his hands pressed flat against his ears as if trying to block out a sound that wasn't there. His lips were moving, but no words were coming out. And then the words came. Not sentences, not complete thoughts, just the same phrase, over and over, in a voice that had gone completely hollow. Get me out. Get me. Get me out. His voice cracked. He started crying. Not the kind of crying that releases something, but the kind that just keeps coming. Wave after wave, like the body has forgotten how to stop. The guards stood outside his cell and watched. Some of them laughed, not because they were evil, but because laughing was easier than feeling what they were actually looking at, which was a human being dissolving right in front of them. Zimbardo's team initially suspected he was faking, performing a breakdown to escape the experiment early. They pulled him out for an evaluation. He was not faking. His psychological state had deteriorated so severely in just 4 days that keeping him inside was no longer scientifically or ethically justifiable. They had to let him go. And here's the detail that reveals everything about what that experiment had done to the remaining prisoners. When the others found out that prisoner 8612 had been released, that he had gotten out, they did not feel relief for him. They did not feel hope. They felt envy. They wanted to break down too. They wanted to fall apart badly enough that someone would come and take them home. But they stayed, because somewhere in the architecture of that basement, in the weight of that number on their smock, in the sound of boots in the corridor at 3 a.m, they had stopped believing they had a choice. And that belief, that invisible, silent, suffocating belief, is the most important thing this experiment ever revealed, because the prisoners were never locked in permanently. No one was holding them by force. They were university volunteers. They could have stood up, walked to the door, and ended their participation at any moment. But they didn't. Because in their minds, they were prisoners, and prisoners don't just walk out. The most powerful prison ever built is the one constructed inside the human mind. By day 3, something had gone deeply wrong. The guards had stopped thinking of themselves as college students doing a psychology experiment, and the prisoners had stopped thinking of themselves as volunteers who could simply walk out the door. Both groups had fallen completely into their roles, not because anyone told them to, but because the human mind is far more vulnerable to its environment than any of us want to believe. The guards began waking prisoners up in the middle of the night for random not because It was necessary, not because anyone instructed them, but because they could. They forced prisoners to do push-ups on a cold floor, made them clean toilets with their bare hands, removed bathroom privileges, and made prisoners use buckets inside their cells instead. None of this was in the original plan. Zimbardo had not instructed any of it. The guards invented these humiliations entirely on their own. One guard, who prisoners secretly nicknamed John Wayne because of his cold, deliberate cruelty, began taking genuine pleasure in his control. He walked slowly down the corridor at night, tapping his baton against the cell doors, just to remind the prisoners he was watching that they were powerless. He was not a violent person before this experiment. No history of cruelty. He was a completely normal young man who had passed every psychological screening. The uniform had done something to him, and the prisoners were breaking. By day 4, several prisoners showed signs of severe psychological collapse. Prisoner 8612 started screaming uncontrollably, crying, raging, unable to speak in full sentences. Zimbardo's team initially believed he was faking to escape early. He was not faking. They had to release him. And after he left, the remaining prisoners did not feel relief. They felt something far worse: envy. They wanted to break down too. They wanted out. But they had forgotten something critical. Something that reveals exactly how deeply the experiment had rewired their minds. They had forgotten that they were free to leave at any time. No one had locked them in permanently. No one was keeping them there by force. They were university volunteers. They could have stood up, walked to the door, and ended their participation at any moment. But they did not, because in their minds, they were prisoners, and prisoners do not simply walk out. That thought, that simple, obvious, liberating thought, had been completely erased by 6 square feet of concrete, a nylon cap, and a number sewn onto a smock. This is what changes everything you think you know about freedom. The most powerful prison ever built is the one constructed inside the human mind. The experiment was shut down on day 6. Not day 14. Not at the end of the planned 2 weeks. Day 6. Because by that point, what was happening inside that basement had crossed a line that science could no longer justify watching. But here is the detail most people never hear. The experiment was not stopped by the university. It was stopped by a woman named Christina, a psychology graduate student, who came to observe. On day 5, she walked into that basement. She watched the guards humiliating prisoners. She watched men who had been psychologically healthy 1 week ago, sobbing on the floor, talking to themselves, refusing to eat. And she walked straight back out and told Zimbardo something no one else around him had been willing to say. What you are doing to those boys is a terrible thing. Everyone else had been inside long enough to normalize what they were seeing. Zimbardo himself had stopped being he had become the prison superintendent, making decisions not as a scientist observing human behavior, but as a man protecting his experiment. He had been consumed by the same psychological force he was supposedly studying. It took an outsider, someone who had not been gradually exposed, someone who saw everything at once with completely fresh eyes, to recognize that what was happening was wrong. Zimbardo ended the experiment the very next morning. So what does all of this mean for you? This is not ancient history. This is not something that only happened to 24 men in a basement in 1971. This is happening around you, right now, in offices, in families, in governments, in every system that gives one group of people authority over another. The first thing this experiment teaches you: never fully trust a role. When someone puts on a uniform, a title, a position of power, something changes inside them. The person is still there underneath. but the role begins to speak louder than the human being. The second thing, watch for gradual normalization. The most dangerous changes in any environment never happen suddenly. They happen slowly, one small step at a time, until the people inside can no longer see how far things have gone. If you ever find yourself thinking this is just how things are here, stop. Ask yourself when that became normal. Ask yourself what you have quietly accepted without realizing it. And the third, the most important of all, the walls that truly hold people are rarely made of stone. They are made of belief, of identity, of the quiet, invisible assumption that you have no choice. The prisoners in that basement were free the entire time. They simply could not see it. Now you know what they did not want you to know. Subscribe if you are ready to see the world as it really is.